My name is Cava Norixious, first of her name, only child of General Copernicus Norixious. I idolized my father growing up, but I never seemed to be good enough for him. I tried and tried, trained my whole life. Until I fell in love. He was an amazing man, a half-orc, so kind, showed me a way of life that I never would have thought. In secret, of course. Father never would have approved. I was able to keep it hidden, too. Until I got pregnant. That one was harder to hide. My father locked me in my room, killed the man that I loved, and arranged a marriage with some dragonborn guy who knew how to keep his mouth shut. I ran away at the first chance I could. I found this little town. I had one friend, Diane. She was so nice to me. She helped me through giving birth, and then I left. She had always wanted a child, and I could not have been the mother he needed. Not then. I ran from town as soon as I was able, cutting out my uterus in the field of the neighboring town. Once I healed and got back to strength, I started taking as many jobs as I could as an adventurer. I needed to be better. I needed to be better so that I could make the world better for my son, whoever he was. I needed to pay the world back for what I did. I eventually took a job with some oddballs, Xylus, Kyriel, Arash, and Merrick. That is until Kyriel pulled from the deck of many things and had her soul revoked from her body. We, of course, went to save her, but when you enter the plane of the unknown, you must confront your greatest enemy. That was my father. I showed myself that I could hold my own against him, look in his eyes, and say no. From there, we were allowed to save her soul. We brought Kyriel back to the land of the living, but it was all too much for her. She left our group that night. After that, we set out for the capital city, finding Dahlia and her guard Gertrude. Dahlia was the descendant of the true leader of our land, and we helped her reunite with the crown. We were celebrated at her coronation. It was a beautiful day. Until a man called Erduin showed up, a servant of the dread Lich Ozara who had terrorized these lands. He said that he had found my son. He had told my father where my son was. He had told an orc tribe about my son. This tribe worshipped a great dragon from the past, and my son, being the child of orcish and draconic blood, would be the perfect vessel for them to re-empower their god by. I couldn't let that happen. We left in the night and made it back to that town I had left all those years ago as fast as we could. We found him, and I was weak. I couldn't tell him who I was. He thought Diane was his mother. I told him I was his aunt. We saved his life, but then my father showed up. With the strength of my new friends, we were able to kill him. But not before the orc tribe showed up. These orcs had killed my friend's family. Together, we negotiated a halt in their murder of us. They gave us 90 days, as long as Arash didn't kill my son. Oh, I screamed at him later that night. but I understood he was doing it for the good. I don't think he would have actually killed D'Anthony. Once we got my son to safety in the capital city, we traveled to the mountains at the word of the head of the wizard college, Ozari, sister to the Dread Lich. In those mountains, we met a dragon who could remove a person's ties to their god. This is exactly what we needed to defeat Erdogan. Gaining this strength would come at a price. We had to cure this goddess of her corruption. We had to cure Arash's goddess of her corruption. We took on the challenge greatly. We fought valiantly, but in the end, it took the sacrifice of Arash's life to save her. Once weakened enough, the dragon was able to reverse this corruption at the cost of our friend. Returning to the capital city, we were given the help by Mistress Ozari of Mael, a bard. This precocious little twerp proved quite helpful. Together we prepared for the incursion, and we won. We stopped the orcs in their tracks and saved my son. I'll never thank them enough for that. Before we could celebrate too long, Erdogan appeared and showed us a giant necrotic dragon that he had brought back. We had thought all the dragons were dead, and now we knew of 2. This was proving to be overwhelming, but we were confident in our skills. We took our time, gathered our strength and our resources, and we traveled to the Forbidden Island. This island is where the Dread Lich made his last stand, no doubt the source of his phylactery. There we had to fight shades of the heroes who had defeated the gods before, giving their lives so that the rest of humanity could escape. After defeating those great heroes, we confronted Erdogan. In the nick of time, severed his connection to Ozara and killed him in his tracks. After the fight, I went back to town and found D'Anthony. After some proper celebration, I took him to his father's graveside, and I told him a story. A love story. My story. We sat by the grave for hours as he asked question after question, and I answered all of them that I could. At the end of that day, I promised my son that I would never leave him again. I would always be by his side when he needs me. I bought a little house outside of the town center, and there we lived. D'Anthony continued his studies with the captain, and I played mother. Every year on the anniversary of my confession, we would visit his graveside, and I would tell him stories about his father. I made sure he was never without strong men in his life. Mael, Merrick, and Xylus were a staple in our household, and the best uncles ever. I, of course, still used my skills in combat, to show off in festivals or to defend the town from minor incursions. D'Anthony was never scared of nightmares with me. He knew that they could never be stronger. I lived for another 50 years after that. I died when I was 71, while leaning against my love's headstone. I loved being a mother and a grandmother. I told stories of my travels to my grandchildren. Although my grandchildren thought they were all myths, my story lives on in the minds of my brothers and my son.